The simulation begins. A human? In my combat simulation? This will be entertaining. Professor Zyralvak's mandibles twitched as his luminous eyes scanned the lineup of students before him. 12 candidates. 11 from battle-hardened species, Ktharn Warbringers, Vol sharpshooters, a lumbering Drekthar brute, and 1 human. He exhaled sharply. Why waste a simulation slot on a species barely out of its own gravity well? Adrian Carter stood at the far end, hands in his pockets, scanning the room with quiet curiosity. No nervous shifting, no darting eyes, no tension in his stance. He might as well have been waiting in line for lunch. Today's scenario is inescapable doom, Zyralvak announced, his voice amplified by the control room's speakers. The overhead lights dimmed as a massive holoscreen flickered to life, displaying a crimson wasteland crawling with grotesque monstrosities. The objective is simple: survive. You will face an evolving enemy designed to exploit weaknesses. Adapt, or perish. I expect all of you to struggle. Let's begin. A pulse of energy surged through the floor as the students' neural links activated. Their bodies stiffened. Then, darkness. A moment later, Adrian's vision adjusted. He stood in a vast, scorched battlefield under a blood-red sky. Jagged cliffs rose in the distance, their edges glowing with molten heat. The ground beneath his boots was cracked and charred, steaming from unseen vents. Across the wasteland, monstrous figures emerged, hulking beasts with serrated limbs and slithering appendages, their skin a patchwork of chitin and exposed muscle. Their shrieks cut through the heavy air. The other students materialized beside him. Some were already drawing weapons. The Ktharn warriors extended razor-sharp claws. The Vol activated precision rifles. The Drekthar brute cracked its knuckles, each impact like thunder. Adrian exhaled. Showtime. The first wave charged. The battlefield erupted in chaos. The Drekthar swung its massive arms, sending 2 creatures flying. A Ktharn warrior slashed at another, black ichor sprang across the ground. The Vol picked off targets from a distance, their plasma rounds searing through monster flesh. Adrian didn't move. He watched. Calculated. The monsters weren't mindless. They studied movements, adjusted attack angles, avoided counterstrikes. One adapted mid-charge, sidestepping a Ktharn's claws and sinking its fangs into the warrior's shoulder. A piercing scream echoed as the beast tore through flesh. Zyralvak's voice crackled in their comms. Already losing ground? Predictable. Adrian tilted his head, noting the creature's attack patterns. Fast, but not random. Adaptive, but not perfect. One lunged at him. His body moved before thought. A step to the right. The beast's claws sliced through empty air. A quick pivot, elbow to the base of its skull. It staggered. Adrian grabbed the back of its head and slammed it into the cracked earth. A sickening crunch. It didn't get up. He straightened, dusting off his hands. Around him, the battle grew more desperate. The creatures learned too quickly. Each failed attack led to smarter counters. The Ktharn's brute strength turned into a liability as the monsters dodged swipes and aimed for joints. The Vol's long-range strategy collapsed when the creatures started zigzagging unpredictably. The battlefield was shifting. No one else saw it. Except him. Adrian moved. A Ktharn warrior staggered back, bleeding. A monster reared for the kill. Adrian grabbed a discarded plasma blade, whirled it once for balance, and threw. The blade spiraled through the air, embedding in the creature's throat. It collapsed instantly. The Ktharn blinked at him in shock. Adrian offered a small nod before slipping back into motion. The key wasn't brute force or precision shooting. It was control. Use the terrain. Predict the patterns. Create the advantage. While the others fought to survive, Adrian dominated. He weaved through the battlefield like a specter, baiting creatures into each other's paths, leading them into pits of molten rock, using fallen bodies as obstacles. A creature lunged, and he ducked at the last second, letting it impale itself on a Vol's plasma rifle. Every movement was calculated. Efficient. Within minutes, a wide perimeter of fallen monsters surrounded him. He hadn't taken a single hit. In the control room, Zyrolvak's mandibles twitched violently. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing at the monitor. "What?" he muttered. "How?" His gaze snapped to Adrian's vitals. Steady. Not a single spike of panic. The human's expression was unreadable, movement surgical. It wasn't luck. The other students were faltering. A Vol's rifle clicked empty. Aktharn dropped to one knee, panting. The Drekthar brute swung sluggishly, wounds slowing it down. The creatures smelled weakness and pressed harder. Adrian remained untouched. "This is unacceptable," Zyrolvak growled. He tapped a command on his console. A deep rumble shook the battlefield. The simulation shifted. The terrain cracked open. From the depths of the digital abyss, a monstrous entity emerged, 3 times the size of anything before it. A fusion of nightmares, with coiled limbs ending in jagged talons, rows of needle-like teeth, and 6 burning red eyes. The apex predator. The ultimate test. No one had ever survived this stage. The students froze in horror. Even the Drekthar took a step back. "Adrian?" He smiled. A slow, deliberate smile. Zyrolvak stiffened. That expression, it wasn't fear. It wasn't even arrogance. It was excitement. The apex predator roared, shattering the sky. Adrian rolled his shoulders. Finally, he muttered, cracking his neck. Then he moved. The battle had just begun. Impossible victory. The apex predator's roar reverberated across the battlefield, a guttural sound that sent a primal chill through the remaining students. A massive clawed limb slammed into the ground, cracking the scorched earth. Twin sets of serrated mandibles clicked in anticipation. It was the perfect killing machine. Adrian Carter stood motionless, eyes locked onto the monstrosity. Around him, the others faltered. The Ktharn warrior barely clutched her plasma blade, her breathing ragged. A Vol sharpshooter's rifle trembled in his grip. The Drekthar brute, normally fearless, had gone deathly still. In the control room, Professor Zyrolvak leaned forward, mandibles tight. His voice crackled through the comms. "This is where you die, human." Adrian tilted his head, as if considering the statement. Then, he moved. The dance begins. The predator struck first. A claw swiped downward with the force of a meteor. Adrian sidestepped at the last possible moment, feeling the wind of its passage. The impact sent molten rock spraying in all directions, the heat singing his uniform. Most would have backed away. Adrian did the opposite. He dashed forward, slipping beneath the towering creature's exposed midsection. A quick scan, thicker plating along the limbs, reinforced armor on the head, but there. A brief flicker where the plate shifted. A vulnerable seam near the lower abdomen. Exploitable. The predator sensed the threat. It pivoted unnaturally fast for something its size, lashing out with a barbed tail. Adrian dropped to the ground, rolled, and sprang up just as the tail gouged a deep trench in the earth where he had stood. The other students weren't so lucky. A Ktharn warrior tried to attack, only to be swatted aside like an insect, her body skidding across the battlefield. The Vol fired 3 shots, each harmlessly deflected by the creature's armored hide. Adrian adjusted his approach. No direct attacks. Not yet. Instead, he analyzed. Every step, every shift in its stance, every moment it coiled before striking. Patterns. Everything had patterns. The predator learns, so does he. Zyrolvak watched the monitors, mandibles twitching in irritation. The apex predator was the pinnacle of adaptive combat AI. It learned from failures, adjusted to enemy tactics, and countered accordingly. Yet Adrian wasn't just surviving. He was adapting faster. Where others reacted, Adrian anticipated. He moved before the creature committed to an attack, as if he could see 2 steps ahead. When it lunged, he was already shifting. When it struck, he was already gone. "This is not possible," Zyralvac muttered, claws tightening on the console. Adrian wasn't stronger. He wasn't faster. He was simply better. And the Predator knew it. It changed tactics. No longer relying on brute force, it began feinting. A claw strike that never fully extended. A tail whip that retracted at the last moment, baiting a reaction. Adrian smirked. "Good. It learns." So did he. Turning the tide. The others were barely holding on. The Drekthar brute charged, roaring, fists raised. A single swipe from the Predator sent him careening into a molten fissure. He screamed before the simulation force disconnected him. Another one down. The battlefield was thinning. Adrian, however, remained untouched. Every movement was purposeful. No wasted strikes. No desperate swings. Every dodge positioned him closer rather than further. The Predator hesitated. Not from fear, it wasn't capable of that. But it had encountered something rare, an opponent it couldn't predict. Adrian saw his opening. A burst of movement, he sprinted toward the beast. It reared back, expecting a frontal assault. Instead, he slid beneath it, twisting mid-motion to stab upward into the exposed seam he had spotted earlier. The plasma blade buried deep. A shockwave of energy coursed through the wound, sending cracks splintering across the creature's armored plating. It roared in genuine agony. Zyralvac shot to his feet. "No!" The apex predator lashed out in fury, but Adrian was already gone, rolling clear as it thrashed wildly. The damage was done. The armor plates, once impenetrable, had been compromised. Adrian exhaled. Time to end this. The killing blow. The predator staggered, massive limbs struggling to regain balance. Adrian didn't let it. He sprinted toward a jagged rock formation. Timing was everything. The beast swung again, a wild, desperate attack. Adrian leapt, using the momentum to launch himself skyward. For a split second, he was weightless. Then, a precise twist. A final adjustment. He landed on the creature's back. The predator bucked violently, but Adrian had already locked his legs around the base of its skull. With ruthless efficiency, he plunged the plasma blade deep into the exposed crevice of its neural column. A shriek. A final, deafening roar. Then silence. The predator collapsed. Dead. Aftermath. The battlefield faded. The simulation disengaged. Adrian blinked as reality snapped back into focus. The once scorched wasteland had been replaced with the sterile walls of the training facility. Around him, the remaining students sat motionless, staring at him with wide, disbelieving eyes. The Ktharn warrior who had barely survived was still panting. The Vol's hands trembled around his rifle. Zyralvac stood frozen in the control room. His mandibles clenched so tightly they nearly cracked. The silence stretched. Then, "That," Adrian said, rolling his shoulders, "was fun." Zyralvac slammed a fist against the console. "Impossible." His voice carried through the speakers, laced with barely restrained fury. "You cheated. No human, no species, could have done that legitimately." Adrian met his glare with a calm, steady expression. "Cheated?" He gestured toward the simulation logs. "Feel free to check. Every move, every action, by the book." Zyralvac's claws dug into the metal surface. He wanted to refute it, to tear the human's victory apart. But the data didn't lie. No hacks. No exploits. No outside interference. Just pure skill. The alien students exchanged uneasy glances. Some looked at Adrian with newfound respect. Others, with something closer to fear. Zyralvac's voice dropped to a dangerous growl. This isn't over. Adrian smirked. Didn't think it was. The professor's eyes burned with unspoken rage. If a simulation couldn't break the human, perhaps it was time to raise the stakes. Breaking the system. Zyralvac seethed, his claws flexing against the control panel. The simulation results were irrefutable. Adrian Carter had dominated inescapable doom, a scenario designed to be unwinnable. Even the apex predator, an entity calibrated to exploit every possible weakness, had fallen. Yet the human stood before him, arms crossed, eyes sharp, utterly unfazed. This is unacceptable, Zyralvac growled, his voice crackling through the overhead speakers. A statistical anomaly. A flaw in the program. Adrian smirked. Or maybe your perfect system just isn't perfect. The professor's mandibles twitched violently. You want a real challenge, human? He slammed a clawed digit onto the console. Then let's see you survive this. The simulation chamber hummed with renewed energy. The floor beneath Adrian pulsed with a cold, unnatural glow. Then the world changed. The gauntlet. Adrian barely had time to register the shift before the environment solidified. He was no longer on the battlefield of before. The scorched wasteland had been replaced by a labyrinth of shifting metal walls, illuminated by eerie, flickering lights. The air was thick with an electric charge, humming with unseen power. A system override. No standard simulation. No pre-designed challenge. Zyralvac had activated the gauntlet, an adaptive AI hellscape designed not to train, but to break anyone inside. Zyralvac's voice echoed through hidden speakers. No one has ever completed the gauntlet. You won't either. Adrian exhaled slowly. Then the first threat emerged. The swarm. A chittering sound filled the space. From the shadows, metallic creatures slithered into view, sleek, multi-limbed constructs with glowing red sensors. Their bodies shifted, reconfiguring into new forms, adapting to the environment and, more importantly, to him. They moved as one. No hesitation. No wasted motion. Adrian darted forward, slipping between two advancing machines. A blade extended from the wrist of one, slicing through the air where his head had been a second earlier. He twisted, caught its arm, and wrenched, metal shrieked as joints snapped. But the others didn't stop. They reanalyzed. Adjusted. He had to stay unpredictable. Adrian hit the ground, rolling beneath a slashing claw. A split-second calculation, he shoved one bot into another's strike path. Sparks flew as the two collided. No time to celebrate. A dozen more converged. Unorthodox tactics. Adrian grabbed a fallen bot's severed limb, twisting it in his grip. The detached metal blade pulsed with residual energy. Fine. He'd improvise. He lunged, carving through the first machine's exposed circuitry. Sparks erupted as its body convulsed. He used its falling form as cover, pivoting just as another lunged. A well-placed kick sent it staggering back into an electrified wall. Its own weight triggered a system surge, frying its internal components. The gauntlet shifted. The walls around him began moving, closing in, redirecting his path, forcing him forward. Zyralvac chuckled from the control room. Still keeping up, human? Let's see how long that lasts. Adrian didn't respond. He moved. No time for mistakes. The air changed. A low hum vibrated through the space, something big was coming. Then he saw it. A towering construct, easily 3 times his height, its body composed of interlocking plates that shimmered with adaptive camouflage. Its arms ended in massive plasma emitters, the energy gathering into deadly orbs of light. It fired. Adrian barely dove aside as the blast vaporized the space where he had stood. He couldn't engage directly. Instead, he ran. Through narrowing corridors, over unstable platforms, dodging as the machine's attacks grew more precise. A dead end loomed ahead. No way out. Behind him, the behemoth charged, its plasma weapons glowing. Adrian pivoted. Use the environment. Use physics. He leapt. A perfectly timed wall kick launched him sideways, just as the construct fired. The plasma blast, meant for him, struck the unstable corridor's support struts instead. The structure collapsed. The machine, too large to maneuver, plummeted into the depths below. Adrian landed, exhaling. One down. The final challenge. Zyralvak's claws dug into the control panel. No. No. The human wasn't breaking. Fine. One last trick. The gauntlet rumbled. The walls vanished, leaving Adrian in a vast, featureless void. Then, himself. A perfect copy. Same stance. Same weapons. Same calculating gaze. A mirrored voice spoke. Only one of us leaves. Adrian's eyes narrowed. Neural mirror combat. You really are desperate. Zyralvak grinned, unseen. The human could adapt, anticipate, but what happened when his own mind was turned against him? The duel began. Beyond limits. The mirrored Adrian struck first. Lightning fast. His speed, his precision. Adrian barely deflected, twisting away. His copy adjusted instantly. No wasted movement. A feint. A counter. Steel met steel. A perfect deadlock. Every move he made, the copy matched. Every shift, countered. No openings. For the first time, Adrian felt frustration. But then, he stopped. Stood still. The copy hesitated. And in that fraction of a second, Adrian struck. Not a predictable move. Not an optimized maneuver. Something irrational. A wild, reckless, impossible feint into a precise finishing blow. The copy's eyes widened, too late. The final strike landed. System overload. The simulation stuttered. The environment collapsed. The gauntlet shut down. Adrian stood alone. Victorious. The aftermath. The simulation chamber powered down. The cold hum faded. Adrian blinked as the real world settled around him. The alien students stared. Not just in shock. In fear. No one ever beat the gauntlet. No one. Adrian exhaled, shaking out his hands. Not bad. Zyralvak was trembling. How did you? Adrian locked eyes with him. You made a system to break me. He smiled. You should have made one to keep up instead. The professor's claws clenched. Adrian turned to leave. And as he walked out, every alien in that room realized something. Humans weren't just survivors. They were something else entirely.